In video 5 from chapter 2, we're going to look at a few more types of theories, beginning with evolutionary theories. And these are theories, based on Darwin's theory of evolution, that organisms and species adapt to the environment in order to survive and have offspring and pass their genes on to the next generation. And when they adapt to the environment, that means these adaptations end up getting passed on to the offspring. And so species can change over time um, based on survival of the fittest. And based on, so, quick example is, at one point, giraffes had somewhat shorter necks than they have now. But the species adapted over time. When food was scarce, then um, those giraffes that had the longest necks were able to get to more food and to feed themselves and to survive. And the ones with shorter necks were more likely to die off, before having offspring. And so over time, it was mainly longer neck giraffes that would survive enough to pass on their genes. And so over time, because long neck genes were getting passed on, the necks became longer, and and this was all due to adaptation, that short necks just would not cut it when food was scarce. And so it's not about excuse me, it's not about a single organism adapting, like a single member of a species. It's about a species as a whole um, adapting by by shifting towards some adaptation that allows them to survive and reproduce. And in the case of giraffes, it was the shift was towards longer necks. Um, Anyways, that's the basis of Darwin's theory, and there's a couple of theories that have kind of built on his ideas. The first one's ethology, and this ethology really became prominent due to studies by Konrad Lorenz, and in particular his studies on imprinting. Um, Ethology studies is a study of the adaptive value of animal and human behavior in the natural environment. The adaptive value of animal and human behavior in the natural environment. What Lorenz specifically studied, imprinting, was he studied baby ducks and baby goslings, baby geese, and and he discovered that shortly after birth, that these baby ducks and geese they would become attached to the mother duck or the mother goose, um, and it was an automatic gene driven process. They didn't become attached because the mother was giving them love or the mother was feeding them. It was basically like a reflex in a sense. It was built into their genes that soon after birth, there's what's called a critical period. There's a short period of time, and the baby geese or baby ducks would become attached to any large moving object that's close by them. Now, in the wild, that would normally be their mother would be hatching them, and the mother, and so they would automatically become attached to the mother. And this is a survival mechanism. It's adaptive. I mean, they're more likely to survive if they become attached and they follow their mother around, then they will get fed, and it will help their safety. Um, in Lorenz's experiments, I mean, he showed that if you remove the mother goose or the mother duck and you replace it with some other large moving object, that they will imprint to that. So he had them imprint to his boots that he wore. Um, and then if he walked around in his boots, they would follow him in a straight line, just like they would follow a mother, like they would normally follow their mother. And if he swam in a lake, they would swim right behind him. Um, so he had them imprint to him, and specifically it was the boots he was wearing, but he also had them imprint to a bucket because he just, when they hatched, he had a bucket that was swinging, so it was moving. It was a large object, and they ended up becoming attached to the bucket. So like, it doesn't have to make sense because it's a reflexive process. And so he showed that this was something that was passed through the genes, and it was an adaptation of the species, so it led to them having more chance of surviving and growing up to reproduce. So you um, Lorenz studied animal behavior, and mainly bird behavior, but others wondered whether or not humans had the same kind of imprinting mechanism, but it's a little bit different with humans. I mean, we become attached to a caregiver over time, but there's no critical period of a number of hours where it has to happen. And by the way, with these ducks or geese, I mean, if they didn't imprint during the critical period, I mean, they would never imprint. The mother could come back later, and they wouldn't follow her around. Um, and and so this was we found that animals have critical periods, and that they have certain behaviors like imprinting. But humans have what's called sensitive periods. We have certain periods of development where um, we are most likely to learn a certain behavior. For the ducks and the geese, it was called a critical period because they had to learn it during that time, or they never would. We have sensitive periods for things like language. If you don't learn language as a child, a young child, I mean, and you try to start later in later childhood or adolescence, I mean, it turns out that you'll never learn language properly. Um, so certain things, we have windows where it is most likely that something will occur. Um, anyways, so that's ethology, studying adaptive behaviors in different species. Sociobiology was introduced in 1975 by Wilson, and he's it's the study of the role of genes in social behavior and culture. I'm not really, it's not something we're going to return to. So I'm just going to give one quick example. I mean, um, what we found is what has been found is that in animal as well as human species, um, we are more likely to protect or help or give to somebody that is related to us because they share genes with us. And if they share genes with us, I mean, like if I help somebody related to me survive, or um, and so that they can grow old and pass on genes, they're passing on genes that are related to my own genes. So it turns out that we certainly do this as humans. I mean, if I have one if I have one life preserver and there's two kids drowning, I'll probably throw it to my daughter rather than some stranger. I mean, like, maybe that sounds cruel, but it's real life. We help those that we are closely related to. And it turns out that animals do the same thing. Animals will help those that have a relationship to them, like through their genes, before they help others. Okay, that's sociobiology. Once again, it's not something we really return to, so just know what it basically is, how genes cause behaviors in society. The next theory we'll look at is called ecological theory. And specifically, we'll be looking at Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, which states that individuals grow and develop within a nested set of influences. So what Bronfenbrenner believed was that it's important that we understand an individual not just on his or her own, or like through one or two other people, but rather within all of the contexts that affect development. So if I want to, understand one individual child, I can't just look at, well, what's his, how are his parents raising him? I mean, I also have to look at how his schooling affects him, and his neighborhood, and what culture he's growing up in, and what kind of health care does he have, and what is his peer group like, and et cetera, et cetera. And this is what Bronfenbrenner points out in his ecological theory, that there are many different systems that affect development. From moving from like systems that the child is intricately involved in, like the family system, kind of outwards to broader and broader systems, like what country is the child growing up in, for instance, and what are the laws there. And in his system, in his theory, excuse me, there are 5 systems mentioned here. I'm going to talk about them as I go to the diagram. And here we see the child in the center, with certain individual characteristics. So the child has a certain sex and age and health status, etc. So there are some internal individual characteristics that obviously affect the child's development. This would include their genes and their whole biological system and things like that. But what he points out in these rings are all the other types of influences that are going to affect this child's development. So let's begin with the microsystem, which is colored yellow. So it's the most immediate system that the child is involved in, where the child is an active participant in these systems. So the child's family is part of the microsystem, the school the child attends, their peer group, their neighborhood play area that the child goes to, the church group the child belongs to, the health services, particular health services and pediatrician that the child has, and or doctor. Okay, and so the child is these are systems that the child is physically visiting and interacting with. And so they will have significant influence on the child's development. Moving outwards, we get to the mesosystem, and it's that green ring, and you just see a bunch of arrows going around it. The mesosystem is pointing out that there are interactions among the microsystem elements. So, you could look at each of the microsystems separately, the family, the school, the peer group, but the mesosystem is telling you ways that they affect each other. So maybe one day the child goes to school and they're teaching, and the school is teaching them about kindness and being kind to others, and especially those that are younger than you, and it really has an impact on the child, and he goes home and he's nicer to his younger sister than he normally is. And okay, I mean, this is a minor example, but what happened in school affects him within his family. And just to reverse it, if let's say within the family, the parents teach the child to have very good manners, and then when the child's at school, he displays his manners, and so the teachers really like him and give him extra attention. So like that's a family system, microsystem affecting the school microsystem. So the mesosystem says that each of these microsystems, they affect one another, they interact. Going outwards, we get to the exosystem. And the exosystem are levels of the environment that are going to affect the child, but the child's not directly involved in them. So you see like neighbors are listed, and legal services and social welfare, um, the friends of family, the mass media. These are all going to influence it. Things are going to influence the child's development, um, even though the child may not be spending actual time in these systems. Um, but they can influence, these exosystem elements can influence the microsystem elements. Let me give you an example of one that's not listed here. Part of the exosystem would be the parent's workplace. So the child may not ever visit his mother or father's workplace, but certainly their workplaces, their jobs are going to influence how they parent the child. So if all of a sudden the mother's doing tons of overtime, working late at nights, working weekends, I mean, it's going to have an influence on how much time she can spend with the child. She may be stressed out while at home, so it'll affect her parenting, and it all starts, at her workplace. So it's affecting the child's development by affecting the microsystem elements. Um, okay. Um, And then we can move outwards even further to the macro system. Um, and the macro system consists of the cultural norms that guide the organizations and the places that make up one's everyday life. So the macro system is affecting, has an inwards effect towards the child. So macro system, it would be things like the laws of the state you live in or the country you live in, um, what kind of um, social, what kind of social services the country provides for, or the state provides for, and things like that. I mean, and just attitudes, you know, ideologies of the culture. So if you grow up in an individualistic society, you're going to turn out different than if you grow up in a collectivist society. So that's though individualistic versus collectivism is part of the ideology of the culture, and it will certainly affect the members of the culture. Okay, so we have those four systems that surround the child, and then along the bottom you can see the fifth system. It's that arrow at the bottom saying chronosystem. And as it says here, events that occur throughout the child's life and changes over historical time. And the chronosystem is the time system. It's just saying that this um, this set of systems doesn't remain stable. It changes over time. So in the macro system, laws will change, and in the exosystem, I mean, the parents might change jobs, and they might move, and they would have new neighbors and new legal services, and um, the friends, of the family will change over time. So, and then, as we go inwards, some of the microsystem elements will change it as well. Once again, if the parents move, the child will go to a new school. They'd have a new neighborhood play area, a new church group, and a new set of peers. And even if they don't move, I mean, as you transfer from one school system to another, going from elementary to middle school to high school, your microsystem is changing over time. Okay, and so you want to point out that it's a system, and it's a set of systems that are always in flux. They're always changing, and as the child's as time goes on and the child's life changes. Well, it mentions historical time as well, like historical events can happen. Something like 9/11, for instance. I mean, children being raised after 9/11 were raised very differently than children before 9/11. It shook all of society and caused some new fears and new paranoia, and all of a sudden parents became much more restrictive of the children's outdoor freedoms and things like that. It's just there was a new fear that kind of set in that caused differences in parenting throughout the whole culture. So that would be an example of a historical event. Okay, and that's the ecological theory. It does what it does well. It's not talking about anything that, it's not talking about like what's happening in the child's mind or anything like that, but it's pointing out all the environmental systems that affect development and, you know, categorizing them, and it does a good job of that. And you can analyze. They use this theory to analyze individuals and, um, as far as what are all the effects on the development, and you can try to identify all the different systems for a particular person or a particular category of people. Okay, let's go on. One more theory in this video is dynamic systems theory, and this is another one I just want to briefly introduce, and I don't really plan to talk about it much more in the course, but it's a newer theory, and I'm just not really overwhelmed with it. Basically, as it says here, different aspects of development interact and affect each other over time in unique ways for each individual. Um, and more specifically, it says that biological maturation operates in interaction with the environment. So you got your biology changing over time, like brain development and then physical development, and it interacts with the environment and also the experiences of a child. Um, and and so basically, it's a newer theory that is merging, trying to merge nature and nurture together. You know, how does the child's changing body interact with the change, you know, the changes in the environment and the experiences that the child has in the environment, and how does that affect their development? Okay, and that's all I want to say about it. You can read more in the text about it. And this concludes video 5.